Welcome to the October call of the maturity model for Microsoft 365 practitioners. We're very happy to have my good friend Susan Hanley here to help us talk about the collaboration competency. Sue is great that she's offered her time. We've done some things in these slides that she may not have ever seen, so Sue, bear with us. You know, we all think about collaboration a little bit differently, and that's why these conversations can be so helpful. Of course, we have our usual cast of characters, sort of our core team on the maturity model: Simon Doy, Simon Hudson, and Sharon Weaver. I think they all have their cameras on. And feel free to turn your cameras on if you'd like us to see your happy faces. We'll do one of those cool screenshot things in a bit. All right. And for some reason, it stopped sharing. That wasn't me.
It's back.
Just for fun.
Is it? No, it's not. Is it sharing? No, it's not. All I'm doing is clicking. There we go. There we go. Okay. So, you know, as usual, our agenda is pretty much similar. We're just gonna give you a quick overview of the maturity model in case you haven't seen it before. We're gonna do together mode pictures. Vesa Juvonen loves that we have those in all of our PMP oriented calls because we get to see how big our audience grows. And then we're gonna talk with our rock star of the day, Sue, about the collaboration competency. All right, so and Simon Doy, I know you sometimes do this bit. Would you like to take this slide?
Of course, I can. Of course, so we talk about this every month. You know, what is the approach and the purpose of the maturity model? So again, the purpose of it is to enable organizations to improve the way that they take advantage of the 365 platform to improve the way that they do things within their organization. You know, we try and take it enables them to kind of select the approach, which competencies they want to concentrate on first, and use that and the information that we provide around the impacts and the benefits to work with the senior management team in their organization to be able to say, right, you know, we want to do, you know, this aspect of collaboration or this aspect of communication. Here's, if we improve our maturity, this is the benefit that we get from it. I think something Sue is going to talk a lot about what is the benefit of doing these things. We also have some tools around, you know, enabling you to benchmark an organization and departments and divisions within your organization. So please have a look at those. At the moment, we've got these published competencies. I won't read them all out. There is work going on in the infrastructure one, and we do also have some supporting articles. So, you know, what are the principles of search and communication, and then also how to elevate. You know, we've got the maturity model, which is talking about, you know, what the benefits are, but then how do you try and move from level 100 to 200? What do you need to do? So we have some how to elevate documents on the competencies mentioned there. Again, we are going to be starting some work on data and analytics, I believe. We have a couple of people who are looking to get involved, so that should be good. So we can start moving that forward too. Next slide, please. So just to give you a refresher, I won't go into too much detail, but you know, the maturity level, the maturity model starts from a level 100, which is that initial chaotic world where you know, you've switched things on, you've signed up to Microsoft 365, and you've got a base place, and we move through from level 100 to 200, where we start to take the ways that we work and the processes and start to push those out to different areas within the business, but it's not something that's being widespread. You can't see the benefit across the organization yet. But when you get to level 300, the idea, there's probably quite a big jump from 2 to 300, where when you get to 300, it is, you know, standard across the organization. It is defined. It is, in place across the organization. So I think it's a big step from 2 to 300. And then level 400, where we start looking at how we can measure those processes and the ways that we work, to be able to use that to optimize and make the ways that we do those competencies better, which moves us into sort of a level 500 where we're using those metrics. And we've got some intent on the right hand side to kind of give an idea of what we're thinking. And then this is sort of a similar thing, but trying to really, the big one is picking up the intent here about trying to put a sentence around each of these levels. So we're trying to put these in place for each of our competencies. You know, what is it that, you know, in a broad sentence, what is it you're trying to do or trying to get from level 100 or level 200? So, you know, helping you work out where you are as an organization too.
And you know, this can be a little bit of fuzzy math. I think if you start reading those intent statements from the bottom up, you sort of get to a point where you say, well, that sort of sounds more like us than the stuff I read below. And that's a good sort of, you know, swag way to figure out, well, where is our organization? We talk to a lot of organizations in consulting who are sort of at that bottom level, and they'd love to get somewhere else. So, you know, you need to think about where you are realistically and where you'd like to be.
Thanks, Mark. So if you want to get involved, you know, this is what it's all about. It's all about you, really, and we want to getting you involved and how you can make the maturity model for Microsoft 365 better, learning your success stories, what has worked for you, what hasn't worked for you. So please, you know, reach out. There are a number of different you can reach out. You can present a case study, which would be fantastic. I'd love to have one of those. Contribute on GitHub, so we've got issues and discussions, so we can, you know, have a chat and discussion around your thoughts, and then use that as well to provide sort of feedback as well. And then please, you know, socialize the content. What is it that you found useful? You know, please share that with others. We've got a couple of links down the bottom, which is, you know, how to run a 365 workshop, and we've now started publishing, you know, the previous sessions, which is great as well. So you can, if you haven't, you know, if it's the first time you've been on this call, have a look through. We've had some great sessions on, you know, content management and communication. But the main thing is about this Practitioners for Maturity Model is it is a safe space for us to kind of discuss our thoughts and ideas and to promote your use of maturity. So we will have a time where we will switch off the recording and, you know, open the forum up for everyone to talk. Right, so I think that's it. Next slide, please. So we've got a couple of sessions in the PMP world. So we've got a community doc session in the middle of November, and then a first time contributor session on the 3rd. So, you know, if you've not, you know, thought about contributing to the PMP world, then that is a great session to understand how GitHub works and how you can start contributing your content to the PMP community. Our next session is on search, so November the 16th, so we look forward to seeing you there. And thank you very much for everybody who attended last month's sessions as well. So it's good to see some familiar names coming each month as well. Next slide, please. Right then, so it is picture time. So if everybody could turn on their video. Now, we normally hand this over to David. Is that all right if we hand over to you, David? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got the recording already. For some reason, the Taylor mode is not showing up in my team's desktop client this morning. So Mark, if it's showing up for you, you're already sharing. You just want to drag it into view.
I could do that.
And I've got the screen recording ready to go.
There, you see some people?
Yep, and we got some seats open still.
I see mature people. Oh, wait, that's the mirror. All right,
anybody?
So is everybody ready to, like, you know, act like you're moving? Has everybody got their camera on who'd like to be seen? Lots of smiling faces. I love it. All right, David, do your thing. Everybody wave. Everybody, you know, look like you're enjoying yourselves.
Yes, absolutely. Excellent. All right.
All right.
Looks great. Back to you.
Thank you very much. And I think we need to hand over to Sharon if she's not chatted too much. So would you mind if I hand over to you, Sharon?
Yeah, actually, absolutely. So, today we're going to be talking about the collaboration competency and how we can apply that to the Microsoft Maturity Model. Our guest star today is Sue Hanley, and we're really excited to have her here because she has a wealth of knowledge and vast experience in this particular area. Sue, did you want to spend a few minutes just introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sharon. So I'm Sue Hanley. I am a consultant specializing in intranets and collaboration solutions. I basically spend all of my time now in the cloud, so pretty much all Microsoft 365. And I do all kinds of things largely related to intranet design, architecture, a lot on governance, and I still do a fair amount of knowledge management strategy consulting. Since I come from that background. So, and as you can see from my pictures, my most important role is as a Mimi to my little Hannah, who lived with us for an entire year during the pandemic. So it's like, it's still going on, but they moved back to LA. So I am now in massive depression mode most of the time since I missed that little girl. So that's me.
So, we're going to talk about the collaboration competency today. As you'll notice, I don't know how familiar you guys with Teams and using the different buttons in Teams, but there are lots of little ways that you can collaborate in this particular session. So you'll notice at the top, if you hover over the little icons, that you have an option to be able to share your emotions, share your feelings, participate in the conversation. You are more than welcome to be on camera with all of us. In fact, I am on so many virtual calls, as most of us are these days. It's just lovely to see people. And on top of that, if anybody has any questions, comments, or would like to participate, feel free to come off mute and just share anything that might be relevant or participate in the conversation as needed. All right, so we spent some time talking with Sue before this particular call, just to kind of pick her brain on when we talk about conversation and collaboration, like what that means. So Sue, when we chatted with you, you gave us some really great examples of how to understand when we're in what kind of collaboration mode, which types of tools we're using. So, so we have this slide that basically kind of walks through all of these different things. So do you kind of want to talk through your thoughts on some of this?
So sure, this is a slide that Marc and I developed for a conference, and it was largely to answer the what tool do I use when kind of question. And there's a lot of overlapping experiences in Microsoft land. And so what the point we were trying to make is that there are different ways to have different types of conversations. And we did this as an exercise, and we tried to characterize this is what I'm trying to do, this tool, this is how I would potentially do that, with the idea that there is not one application or tool that we use for each conversation. We sort of fit the tool based on the scenario that we're trying to solve. And that isn't really overwhelming for people, because when you think about all the different ways you collaborate in daily life, you do use different tools for different things. Like, I would never make a phone call to my children because they don't answer the phone, but I can text them and have a conversation with them immediately. And yet when I'm calling my stepmother, believe me, there's no cell phone. If she has a cell phone, it's never turned on. I have to use the regular landline phone. And so understanding the scenario is kind of really important. And so Marc and I said, well, why don't we come up with an idea. This is all Marc Anderson, the concept.
I think it was right before lunch.
Yeah, because it's definitely related. He said, look, everybody knows what a sandwich is. Why don't we tell the story of what tool to use when, not from the perspective of all those fancy diagrams, but let's talk about something everyone can relate to. So, I want to make a quick, time-sensitive decision. I don't know if I would always say they're low importance, but hey, want to go grab a sandwich. And the clear answer is that's chat. We don't need to preserve it. We don't need to retain it. Depends on your organization, but it's not useful later on. The other kind of decision we might want to make is, hey, let's pull the community, the group that we belong to. Where should we be ordering from? And that you have options, depends on how your group what kind of a community you have, how have you been collaborating in the past, but that might be chat, it might be Teams. Again, it depends. The other one is, hey, we want to work with someone that we've not worked with before, have a more formal conversation. We'd like to work on a sandwich with you. For that one, what we'd like to share is that Outlook email is not dead. It's still alive and kicking, and often we don't have necessarily a connection or a federation with an external colleague's Teams environment. And so you could still use email for that. I promise you it's going to work. Although what I've noticed is that even with some of my external colleagues, not everyone's checking email anymore. So again, you got to know your audience. But if you've never had an interaction with someone, that's probably the right way. And then if you are really trying to go across the organization and say, hey, what do we know about sandwiches across the entire organization? It makes far more sense to look at a community of practice, because again, people aren't going to totally agree with me, but look, I think a team or a little team are where you get work done. Teams are small. I honestly, this could be an entire separate conversation, but there is no such thing as a team of 2,500 people. That is not a team. You can't get work done with 2,500 people. A community, however, can be inclusive, and communities should have topic focused. So if I wanted to crowdsource the entire organization who knows about sandwiches, I hope that in an organization bigger than 30, you would think about a community experience such as Yammer. So there you go. All right, now I want to keep something private. We want to start a sandwiches division. Again, it depends. Who am I talking to? Is there a private team that I can work with, or am I going to send an email with maybe a do not forward, something like that? Again, you got to know your audience. I want to communicate something about sandwiches. We see they're trending up. Now you got options as well. I could tell that story in SharePoint News. I could chat with my colleagues, my immediate colleagues who are on my work teams, or I could post it in a broader Yammer community. And then finally, the last one is, hey, we're firing the sandwich guy and it's you. At some point you do need to have a one-on-one, face-to-face, teams to teams conversation with people. It isn't always about electronic. And so this is the alternate. If we did this from the perspective of my children, is you don't break up with someone via text. Same kind of concept. And so I think the important thing is that there are different ways to have conversations. And again, the most important thing about this is that you and your immediate work team, the people with whom you are collaborating, have a shared understanding of how you want to communicate and collaborate. And when you create a work group or a team, when you're storming and forming and norming, I don't know if we have slides on this to go forward, but what kind of goes with this concept is when we create a team, we think about, who's doing what's the charter, what are our deliverables, what are our outcomes and our objectives. I believe that we should also have a collaboration contract with our colleagues. What are we naming our files? Where are we putting them? How are we holding each other accountable? What channels are we using in our teams? What goes where and what do we call it and who's responsible for it? All of that. And what do we do when we're on the road if that ever comes back into being? Like, how do we sort of make things happen when we're disconnected? All of that really should be part of how we think about collaborating in our immediate work groups. And I think we should be writing that down the same way we do our project charters, that we should, if we have a set of deliverables and a set of tasks that we're supposed to be doing, our collaboration contract, our service level compact agreement with our colleagues should be part of that as well. So that we are, at least as a work group, understanding how we're going to basically do our sandwich collaboration.
I love this. It's just so great.
So yeah, so this next slide was when I sort of shared with you that so one of my areas of expertise is governance. I spend a lot of time helping organizations think through Microsoft 365 governance. I have a whole set of questions, a framework for thinking about governance. It's been downloaded about 17,000 times, which is pretty cool. But anyways, one of the questions that we often have to think about as organizations is how do we explain the difference between what right now feels like the two most overlapping tools, or two of the more overlapping tools in the Microsoft 365 universe. And this is just one of many ways that I try to sort of explain the difference between a team and a community. And Yammer is the hero application for communities, and Teams is the hero application for teamwork. And yes, they do some overlapping things, but there is kind of this fundamental difference. It depends on, I guess, how you want to look at this, but Teams conversations are slightly more ephemeral. Yammer conversations might persist for a longer period of time. Teams are established and they go away. That's not true of like all teams, but you can think about a team having an action that they need to complete, where a community exists for the length of time that the members care about that topic. And communities thrive on the asking of questions and the answering of those questions, and teams may thrive more on the creation of documents and the completion of deliverables. And so while it's not a perfect scenario, again, the kind of you have to think about what is the outcome I am trying to achieve with my collaborative initiative, and then figure out what is the best approach to sort of what technology are we going to use, how do we agree to use it, and what are the norms that we're going to use for that collaboration.
There was a question in chat. Where does SharePoint fit in the collaboration, not communications, but team sites? Is it only part of MS Teams now? The slide shows the communication aspect.
So I don't look at, to be honest with you, SharePoint is from a collaboration standpoint, is the hoster of documents. And if you have team sites that are not Teams connected, you're collaborating around the creation of documents, and you can only do that in SharePoint. It is the only platform in the suite that holds a document. You can't do any document collaboration if you're not using SharePoint, but SharePoint's not really great for conversation. There's really no place to have a conversation in SharePoint. And if you think comments on pages are conversations, those are comments on pages, and don't get me started on those. I think, so SharePoint is the hoster for document collaboration experiences, but that conversation plus document experience, the hero for that is really Teams. So you can't do Teams without SharePoint. You can't do Yammer without SharePoint, for that matter. And I look at SharePoint when it comes to conversation as a delivery channel for community conversations, because we have the Yammer community conversations web part. I can see an opportunity for a Teams chat web part on the Teams site that goes with a SharePoint, with a Microsoft team. But if you buy my concept, from me, in my head, Teams are private, which means they don't typically belong on a SharePoint community. Those conversations wouldn't surface on an open communication site. That would be like part of your intranet, which is, again, that's the part of the world that I spend most of my time in. But I would love to see a team chat conversations app, the way we have Yammer, surface on the team site connected to a team. That would make me very, very happy, because then it wouldn't matter where I get my work done. I can still have the experience that is my preference. And what I've noticed in my consulting practice is if you come from a SharePoint team site background, you like that. Yeah, that's where you're most comfortable. And you may prefer, you would love to be able to stay there. When you have never seen SharePoint before, you don't probably ever go to the SharePoint site at all. You're going to live your entire world in Microsoft Teams. I'd love to make that a little easier to have, yes, a channel conversations web part. Yes.
So as I mentioned, we met with you earlier and had some conversation. I don't know what's echoing. Sorry about that. And we came up with just some thoughts out of that conversation. And so we kind of chopped those down, and we thought, maybe you could just speak to some of the things that we talked about to share with others. What are some of your thoughts around collaboration as a competency, and what does that mean to the people who, are using this and are thinking about in their organization? What do I need to think about? Where are we headed? What are we trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a weird thing to describe collaboration as a competency because it's something that an individual person could be potentially good at. And you have to think about how would I measure an organization's ability to, or depth, or how well they do at collaboration. I think the only way to do that is to focus on what are the business outcomes we're trying to achieve, and are we getting to those outcomes? There's no blood test for are you a good collaborator. And I think what we really need to think about is what are the outcomes that good collaboration would demonstrate? What are the metrics against which we would evaluate our organization? And they may be highly personal to an organization. So for example, in a consulting firm, which is the world that I have grown up in, we might be able to measure the success of our collaborative activities by looking at the proposal success rate, for example. Because if we are more effective, the assumption would be that if we're more effective at winning proposals, it means we're collaborating more effectively at bringing the entire knowledge of the organization into each proposal, that we are making. And why else would we be focused on collaboration if it is not in service of our organizational key performance metrics? So you can't really measure anything related to maturity of anything without really understanding what makes your organization tick and what aspects of this particular competency connect to that key core outcome. So when I'm doing sort of knowledge management strategy, I almost always start with what are our key KPIs, and then what initiatives can we do that directly affect those KPIs. And the reason I want to do that is nobody pays for a sideshow project. You always want to be in the main tent. And what you don't want to be is number 11 on the top 10 things we're going to do this year. And so I want to make sure that when we think about anything that we're promoting or trying to get behavior change around or trying to create a key initiative for, that it's directly tied to what the organization, how the organization measures themselves already. Because the good thing about that is we're already counting that. And so we can look at what is our impact against that metric. I'll take a breath. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's see. Do you want me to address some of the other things?
I know we talked about the anecdote we put in here because I thought that was a really good example of kind of how to think about. So you talked a little bit about kind of culture, and we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes too. But the idea of understanding what the culture is in terms of their style and the way they do things, and how to get people to really be successful at collaborating in a meaningful way. So there's not a lot of great ways to really put metrics and analytics around that. But I love this anecdote because it was a way for you to really kind of look at what are they doing and how are they doing it? How do we know that they're doing what we want them to do?
Well, I mean, I disagree that if there's no way to measure it, then I'm not so sure it's a valuable outcome. So I would say, first of all, we have to get over that. Business leaders pay attention to things that you can measure. And there are ways to measure things that are more squishy. I feel like I have a PhD in squishy measurements because I've been working in knowledge management for 25 years. So believe me, there are ways to measure squishy outcomes. I've even written about how to do that for squishy outcomes in SharePoint. You can find that on my website. But anyways, to take that back. So basically, if the outcome goal that you're trying, so I worked with an organization where one of their outcome goals was to reduce the size of their email. The real thing they need to do is reduce the size of their email inbox files. And so that was the metric that they could measure against. But so what they wanted to do was and also to reduce the amount of reinvention of the wheel, to make sure that there was sort of one and only one copy of each asset, so that people weren't sort of working along, and then realizing, oh my God, I could have had a V8. I could have used someone else's assets as a starting point and then taken it from there. And so as part of this initiative, initially to reduce the size of email inboxes, what they were able to do as part of their sort of revamping of how we work was they were able to get a key leader who happened to be in Europe, it was a global organization, to refuse to reply to email. He goes, I know how to do this. I just won't reply to an email message internally that has an attachment. And if I do that, that will force my entire team to put their content in that single point of truth, one location, so that we can collaboratively edit. Their other big goal, by the way, was to reduce the amount of churn it takes to collect feedback on a document. I've named it. I call it a disease. I call it versionitis. And you know the symptoms. You get an email attachment, .v1, .v2, .final, .really final, .this time I mean it, _sh comments. Incredibly unproductive, and God forbid you're that person that has to do all that collaboration. So they had a whole bunch of really measurable goals. And so he said, I know how to solve that problem. I just won't respond to emails that have attachments. And so he wrote an Outlook rule. I think we actually taught him how to do this. I'm not sure he totally knew how to do this. We have an Outlook rule. So that if attachment and internal have this lovely little reply saying, thank you very much. I'm so happy to work with you, blah, blah, blah. Put it in. I won't say the name of it. Then you'll immediately recognize the company, blank, blank, net. And send me a link, and I'll be happy to review and reply within 4 hours, something like that. And it was amazing how quickly anyone who communicated with him changed their habit. Now, remember, the whole thing was happening in Outlook. This wasn't in the era of Teams, but an amazingly effective way of changing behavior by engaging key influencers to help drive that behavior. And he did it in a very practical way. And so that was the story I shared with you, and it was extremely effective. And again, when you're trying to make change in an organization, you really need to, answer, everyone in the organization is already listening to the same radio station, WIIFM, what's in it for me? And what you want to think about is how can we communicate the benefit to me for participating in this change initiative. And so one of the many ways of doing that is to get a key influencer. It doesn't always have to be a leader. Get a key influencer to model the behavior and promote the behavior, and that can help as well.
Yeah,
so that's what you just highlighted. I talked about these T-shaped managers. I read this article in the Harvard Business Review that had a profound influence on me because it talked about the people who were influential this way, not just up and down. And we all know who those people are because they're in every organization. Get that person to sort of adopt the behavior, and others will follow. And then I guess this last point, which I think is fundamentally critical to the collaboration competency, is that if the organization's culture doesn't recognize the benefit of reuse, only values innovation, or basically, breaking through a wall, even though there's a perfectly good door, it will be very hard to get people to participate in collaborative exercises because they will see that they're only getting credit, if you will, or recognized by doing things that are new, not taking advantage of things that exist to create something even better. So at the end of the day, organizational culture drives the collaboration experience, and someone's willingness to participate in an online conversation will only happen in an organization that tolerates failure and doesn't ding people for asking dumb questions, that recognize that people are, at different points in their learning journey, and there is no such thing as a dumb question. Sometimes someone asks, the innocent, the emperor's wearing no clothes kind of questions that causes everybody to take a step back and say, whoa, what were we ever thinking about? Clearly, this is completely unclear. Try explaining some of the key Microsoft decisions to clients who have never seen it before.
So when we were preparing for this session, this particular item on this slide really resonated with us. And I think we'll see how, Sharon and Simon and Marc and I really thought a lot about where does the impact of organizational culture sit in the competency model. It really changed our thinking so much that we're going to have to go back and rewrite parts of the original competency that we published. As the organizations become more mature, they don't use more features in collaboration. They become better at culturally collaborating. And I think that was a really important takeaway for me from the conversations that led up to this.
Yeah, I don't remember. Did I share the DuPont story with you guys? Because I have a client story that I'm actually allowed to tell that is super powerful, and it talks about the benefit of using sort of collaboration technology. I don't know if I told you guys that, but it's a quickie. I actually have, when I do this in slideshows, I have an illustration to show what happened. But, all right, so here's the scenario. So there was a plant manager working on some kind of a seed thing at one of the divisions of DuPont. And he had recently joined the organization at a relatively senior level, working in Egypt. And he had just completed sort of their orientation program. So he was aware of the fact that they had a major communities of practice initiative, one of which was a plant managers community. So if you are a typical engineer, which he was, the way you answer questions if you don't know something is you basically look around 6 feet and you ask the people around you, or you up level to your manager. He was about to face a major production issue at the end of the day. And of course, his manager wasn't around, nor were any of the colleagues who might have been able to help him, because it was something that, he's the top of the food chain, he was supposed to know. So having remembered that there was this community of practice, he like, whatever, I'll try it. Posted a question and then went home for the day. While he was sleeping, because it's a global organization, 10 different people responded to his message, coalescing around 2 alternative approaches. And when he got back in the morning, he was able to look at the pros and cons of each of those approaches. And he said in his reply, this was actually a Yammer experience, this was fantastic. I believe I saved about $200,000 by not trying to go with my gut and following these proven approaches, because he chose the one that was most relevant for him. Now, of course, the senior leadership in the organization was not paying attention to the community, but there was someone who snapshotted the conversation and emailed it to, again, using the comfort zone of the recipient, emailed it to a senior executive. Well, that guy was massively impressed. And then he, of course, sent an email to all of his colleagues at that level of the organization. And the next thing you know, and what he did by sending that email, by the way, is he copied the person who asked the question, the people who answered the question, and their managers. What he did in doing that is he made it safe to not know something. He made it safe to ask a question. He also recognized the importance of reuse. That the answers that the guy in Egypt got came from the US and from someplace in Europe. So he also recognized the fact that, hey, we're a global organization. We don't even know what we don't know, but we know everything. Together we know it all. And so he, was able to create this safe space and, make it safe to not know something and to ask a question, and also recognize the people who answered the question, which was also really important culturally. And that community ended up becoming the number 2 most popular community in DuPont. And I bet you're wondering, well, why wasn't it number 1? It got all that recognition. Well, the number 1 community was basically the number 1 tool used for everything, the community around the number 1 tool used for everything in DuPont, and that was the Excel community. So it was number 2 after Excel.
That's a great anecdote too, because you didn't really talk about technology much in that, right? It was more about the people and what they did and how they interacted. The tools they used, it could have been anything.
Could have been anything,
right? And the point is that collaboration is a thing that people do, not a thing that technology does.
Yeah, one thing about this, there actually is a tool that it couldn't have been. This would not, here's the one thing that's super important. This wouldn't have worked if it was email. This is really, truly an example of email. Yeah. He wouldn't have known. Here was the point. He didn't know to whom to send the email. It was sort of the perfect storm because there was no DL he was aware of. He didn't have a network because he was new. And so, when you think about one of the biggest challenges in many organizations is bringing people up to speed quickly. I often think about what's the difference between a new person and someone who's been around for a long time. Biggest difference is the people network. Those newbies are far more incented to use your technology to make their connections than the person who thinks they know who might have the answer. But that person who's just making 10,000 phone calls is going to do a lot more work than the new person who's going to reach that broader community. So that entire anecdote and experience, by the way, how do you measure those successes? Collect those anecdotes. And if you want to name that approach, I call that serious anecdote management. So you can even give it an acronym, call it SAM. It is a very effective technique to collect story. And that, by the way, had a measurable outcome. There was $200,000 in that story. You don't need too many stories to add up to a meaningful number that is sort of raises it up to the level of attention to leaders.
So we did chat a little bit, and I know, we 100% agree. And like Simon said, after that conversation, it really made us think very heavily about kind of what we were trying to accomplish and how to kind of overlap, that information. We did, however, talk about one tool that you felt maybe, we're not sure where it's at yet, but that really has some potential to bring a lot of value to the collaboration space. So I mean, we just had some really simple notes and a little pop in here, but I just wanted to let you have a minute or two to talk about what Viva and Viva Topics could do for people in terms of collaboration.
So yeah, so we're kind of mixing metaphors here. So Microsoft Viva All In, I think is phenomenal, but there's two pieces of it that I find are like the most relevant for me from a knowledge management perspective. So Viva Topics, I've decided that is what I dreamed about when I was the director of knowledge management for a global consultancy. Here's what I imagined. So we get a request for proposal, and it's a strategy for a financial organization. I want to know, what other strategy proposals have we done for financial organizations? Who's the expert in that topic? Who can I talk to write a successful proposal? What I imagined is I would start typing my proposal, and pooh, magically, Clippy or somebody would come up and say, hey, we've done this 10,000 times before, Sue. Here's 3 examples of successful proposals. Here's 5 people you can talk to. And here's sort of other assets that will make your story so much better. Well, I mean, imagine how I reacted when I saw the vision for Viva Topics. That's basically what it is, connecting what we know by topic and then delivering it to me contextually, wherever it is. Now, it is not quite as magical as we think, but it has the potential to be there. So when you combine what the AI puts together for you and what a human being can curate, you have this great opportunity to improve the ability to deliver knowledge to people when and where they need it. And so if you extrapolate that to the concept of collaboration, what that really means is that our collaboration can be that much more effective, because again, why are we doing it? To not reinvent the wheel, to make sure we know what we know, to get business outcomes. And so I think Viva Topics, it's evolving, and it's not quite yet at, when it was announced, we had all kinds of slideware that showed the potential, and we're just starting to see some of that come to fruition now. Maybe we slightly underestimated how much effort it was going to be to curate the topics in addition to the AI. The AI we're using it in a very large organization, and honestly, it gives you too many people, and some of the people it identifies have absolutely no knowledge of this, but it's getting there. It gets better all the time, and if you crowdsource some of that, you can get to a better outcome.
I sort of think of that as, from a collaboration perspective, it's like having that person on the team who knows everything about what's going on in the organization.
Yeah.
Right. And we used to try to get those people on our teams because it'd be like, oh, well, if we had Betty on this team, she knows everybody. Right. That's the technology equivalent of Betty.
Yeah, it's also like get Betty in that Yammer community that focuses on the discipline that Betty's an expert in. That's one of the ways that we used to try and do that as part of my KM communities. I wanted the experts to be part of the community, but I never had them be the leader of the community, because if you really want to make sure that no question goes unanswered, you ask a brown belt to be the moderator, not a black belt. And the reason is brown belts have an incentive to learn, and they will it is in their best interest. What's in it for them? It is in their best interest to learn. That is what makes them, that's what, what drives their joy, because that's how they're going to progress. So having a brown belt or, whatever the next level down is, moderate the community to make sure that there are no, that they mention the expert who's in the community, because we got them to be part of it, to remind them, hey, there's a question you think you can answer, is a great way to ensure that we get that outcome. Here's also why I think Viva Topics is so cool. We are now able to assign a topic to Q&A, really any conversation in Yammer, and very soon we will be able to see that Q&A, that recent conversation about that topic in the Viva Topics card, bringing the entire experience, the knowledge that we have that's explicit and the knowledge that is more tacit and in the moment together in the topic card to deliver it to people in context when and where they need it, which, that's the kind of the holy grail of knowledge management and super important. The other aspect of Viva, which is much more explicit and curated, is the concept of bringing in the dashboard, Viva Connections dashboard card, which is now available for people to preview, and to bring more, so to bring tasks and actions into people directly in their in the intranet. And so I'm not sure really I can't remember where we went with this and why I thought that was relevant to collaboration, but I do think it's yet another way to bring opportunity into the intranet.
Yeah, I think
collaborative opportunity.
And if you aren't aware of Viva Connections, I mean, Viva Connections is included with your license. It's easy to set up. I think it brings a lot of benefit to collaboration because it kind of connects a lot of dots across Teams and SharePoint. So, I mean, if nothing else, it just kind of makes everything a little easier in general.
Right, but I guess so I think the reason this is a screenshot from what I was doing in my own intranet, and one of the things I wanted to do is sort of feature some best practice guidance. That's what the file and document naming guidance is all about. So I wanted to feature that as a card. And then the other was sort of individual targeted to me tasks. I think that's super important. And the third thing was, hey, you want to bring your collaborative communities front and center. You can also target them. Hey, you got a question? Here's a Yammer community that you can connect with as well.
Can I just do a time check? We've got about 13 minutes left. I don't know what more slides there are here, and I know we want to have some conversation. You tell me where we go from here. But
so I think all we have left is just to kind of walk through how we applied this to the maturity model. So I think it'd be good to just talk through we can do it fairly quickly. So, you know, we like we said, we chatted with Sue and we really got her thought on things. And then, you know, we got together and we really took that. And, you know, this is always going to be organic. It's always going to be changing. It's always going to be kind of growing just like anything should. But, you know, when we look through the maturity model and we talk about what we're trying to accomplish at different levels, I think the key to all of this, if I summarize it, and Simon, you guys can tell me or comment if you disagree or if you have any additional thoughts, but we really realize that, you know, 100 across the board, no matter what competency we're talking about, is that idea of people are just kind of doing what they're doing. There's really nothing that's planned or structured or formal. They're just kind of trying to accomplish daily life and muddle through and do what they got to do. But once we get into 200 and 300, they start starting to identify that processes are needed. They're formalizing things. They're even starting to put metrics and analytics around thing by level 300. And so from a process perspective and from a tool perspective, you know, 1, 2, and 300 is that growth in pretty much every organization around maturing, just in general around formalization. But I think the key takeaway after much conversation was that to really mature an organization on the collaboration side was that all of a sudden what happens is, if you notice at level 300, we're really defining using metrics to look at the process itself. But this piece of culture is starting to become developed. And that's not something we talk fairly heavily about in any other competency, which is probably something we need to think about. But specifically in collaboration, this little baby culture piece starts to come in. And by the time you get into 400 to 500, that culture piece is way more important than the process in terms of maturation and development. And all of a sudden, the culture piece tops to the top. And now all of a sudden, we're focused on how well are we developing our culture? How well are we empowering our users and our managers and the people that are participating in the collaborative, you know, piece of this to be able to do what they're supposed to do? How are we sharing information? How are we gathering tacit knowledge? How are we, you know, keeping track of that stuff? And then when we really get to a super duper mature point, are we thinking in non-traditional ways? Because when we talk about traditional ways of gathering analytics, and I love that Sue talks about this because it's squishy, right? By the time you get to 400 to 500, you're trying to keep track of and metric and analyze and look at the numbers for something that is squishy. We're not saying, you know, this is something we can really do hard numbers on. And so, you know, we really had a conversation about, well, how do you make sense of all of that? And I love your point of gather the stories and get the information and see what people have done. And we even came up with this really fun anecdote of the idea of, you know, think about a really mature organization. Those are the organizations that are maybe encouraging things like, decorating their desks for a holiday. And it sounds silly, but if you allow that to happen, and then maybe you even do some sort of a competition around it, and you put people into teams, maybe people that don't know each other even, you could then actually, at a very mature level, encourage collaboration because you're getting people to know each other and you're getting people to work together in small teams. And at the end of it, you're chewing a true metric of how well did they work together? What did they come up with? What did they produce as part of this effort? And in Agile, I know we do a lot of things like hackathons, or they'll put people in a room and they'll have like the weekend things where they'll just stick them in a room and say, make this project. And then we're going to kind of look at it at the end of it. But I think what's really important to this is that culture really pops up to the top, and we're really focused on non-traditional ways of making sure that that culture is not only encouraging, not only promoting, but assertively pushing people into non-traditional, uncomfortable ways of collaborating that maybe they're not familiar with, that's going to really make that collaboration go.
Well, I think you need explicit cultural initiatives that reward people for collaboration activities. And so I think that's part of this. There's also something I think that's kind of missing somewhere around the 300 level. The other thing that must be baked into processes is the idea that the first thing you do when you start a new task is see where it's been done before. It has to be, so two things really need to happen. Number one, all processes start with that research phase or the discovery, where who else has done. We can't be the first. We need to go see. We need, part of our process is that we always go find where else have we used this. That's really kind of what Viva Topics is hopefully going to make easier, because you'll just get it without having to add that step. But that step has to be baked in to the culture. And then the last part is every time we wrap up an initiative, there is time to gather up the key assets and put them where they're supposed to go, preserve them for the future. I don't want to go into like an after action report, but there has to be a time baked into our project structure that allows us to take that knowledge and do whatever we need to do to make it more findable. And so we have to make sure that it's baked into the proposals that we give to our clients, that part of the benefit of working with us is that you get the benefit of our entire organization. Our process includes this part, a project closeout that, takes our key assets and puts them in a place where they can be findable and more reusable. And so our process starts with what have we already learned, and it ends with let's make sure that our learnings are shareable. And I think that fundamentally, when that's fully baked in, that's where you're at a fully collaborative org. That's when you're the most mature.
And it's not just time. You said it right up front, but the incentives as well. It's right. It's not just something you put on a schedule and hope people do.
It's in everybody's performance.
You reward people for that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was one of the things we talked about at, even at the level 500, is that we're not just encouraging people to collaborate, we're expecting them to collaborate.
Yeah.
So these are a few, and I think these are a few resources that you provided as recommendations. I don't know if you want to talk about any of them at all for just a minute.
Sure. Well, the first one is an article that I wrote many years ago about this whole concept of a team member service level agreement, about coming up with this collaboration contract. And it evolved in name because people read the article and said, oh, I would have called it this, that, and the other. And then the second one is an article that I wrote with Lorian Strant. It happens to be in Sway, my least favorite tool, but that was his favorite of the moment. Anyways, that sort of brings the terminology collaboration contract into play and tells the story again based on that foundation. Somehow we were all talking about managing information overload and managing email. And I had said that one of my clients had given me this little teeny tiny book called The Hamster Revolution that absolutely changed my life. I read it on the flight home from where I was visiting them and immediately reorganized all the way I manage my content, not just email, but also the files in my personal collaboration files. I highly recommend it. One of the things I love about the book is there is in the very beginning, there is a table where you can measure how much of your life you are losing to reading email. And when you multiply it times everyone in the organization, in order to really get the most effective outcome from following the recommendations in the book, everybody has to play. And so you want to convince an organization to change how they communicate via email. Just calculate the metrics for your organization, and it's incredible. First of all, you realize how much I could be doing with my life. And then second of all, you realize if everybody cooperated and followed the same technique. And there's simple little things like in the subject line, telling someone what you need them to do, for your review, decision needed. And then, oh my God, here's the most important thing of all. If you're going to write a long email, go for it, whatever. Summary up front. First 2 sentences tells me everything I need to know. And if I want to read more, I read more. You want to get your emails read, don't make them super long. Anyways. And then we were also talking about sort of how do we have conversations in teams. And we were talking about sort of, how do you mention everybody so that they actually respond until they start ignoring your Teams chats the same way they're ignoring your email messages. And I said that Matt had really kind of defined some guidance for them. That's what that's really all about.